Hi, welcome to the small shed, or should I say Hanbury Wharf. See you in a minute. So here we are at Hanbury Wharf, ready for the start of the third stretch up the Worcester to Birmingham Canal. Let's go and have a walk up the towpath up to Stoke Prior. Now today we're continuing with the walk to Menning Sheds at Stoke Prior and back here looking at the BBC transmitter along the way that's pretty unmissable, and chatting about synchronicity. Where we are now is where I got the double glazed units for the small shed door made, so in some ways the synchronicity started already. At this junction here we join the Worcester and Birmingham Canal, which runs from Diglis Basin in Worcester through to Kings Norton Junction in Birmingham. It's another narrow canal running 24 miles just over through 58 locks. Thankfully today we're only walking this stretch from here up to Stoke Prior and back again today, and I think this is about 6.5 miles. It's the bigger stretch of all of it. The greatest unknown for me, because I've never actually been any further than this point here along the towpath. We've only ever walked out from our house up to here and back, so I'm on new ground all the way along here. Again, same as the junction canal we saw yesterday, it's for boats that are 70 odd foot long, 7 foot wide, narrow canal as such. The bill for making this one was passed in 1791 and it started in 1792 at the Birmingham end, but it progressed fairly slowly, and it wasn't until 1815 that they opened the last section. Big user of the canal was Cadbury chocolate factories at both Bourneville and at Blackpool down in Worcester. I have been a student of Cadbury's Bourneville factory for probably 20 years or more, studying the railway in the factory itself, and as a spin-off I've had some looks at what goes on down at the Blackpool factory. That complex down at Blackpool, where Cadbury's used to make Cadbury cakes, is in fact where the scrap store Worcester Resource Exchange is that we go to and get all the bits of stuff for nothing, or next to nothing. As I mentioned, there are 58 locks on the canal. 30 of them are the tardy big locks, which are just to the north of where we stop today, so it's probably best that I didn't go to the shed and walk north, because it's quite a climb. There's the climb of the whole canal from Worcester to Birmingham is about 400 and odd feet, but certainly the tardy big flight is one of the biggest lock flights in Europe, and so it's a fairly hefty strain to get up there. Over here on the left is the Droitwich transmitting station. You may find on, or remember seeing, some of you on old radios, there used to be a station there for Droitwich. It was a long wave transmitter and also medium wave, and it was established in 1934. It's the BBC's most powerful transmitter. The masts you can see from the M5 motorway if you're going down south at all, between Droitwich and Bromsgrove, as well as from the western side you can see it from the Worcester-Hereford border. And at night there's two sets of bright red warning lights on the top that again visible from a long way away, and a lot of folks locally have called them the devil horns of Wychbold, which is where the actual transmitter is. It's not actually in Droitwich, and I always know I'm home when I can see the masts in the sky in front of me. Now in 2011, as part of the BBC cuts, it was announced that they wouldn't reinvest anymore in long wave, and that will mean an eventual end to Radio 4 in this part of the radio spectrum. And certainly the transmitting station at Droitwich's days are very much numbered, because the transmitter relies on a pair of glass valves. Now, the valves are a metre high, they're huge things, and are at the moment the only thing stopping the transmitter going off the air. They're so rare that they reckon there are fewer than 10 in the world, and the BBC bought up the entire global supply that they could find, and each one of them will last anywhere between 1 and 10 years. So when one of the last two blows up, the transmitter will go quiet, and that will be it. It's all the equipment there is so antique that the BBC don't believe it's possible to manufacture new valves. A slightly faulty replacement could cause a catastrophic failure of the rest of the transmitter, or other parts of it anyway. And when they do fail, they get a huge arc surge of power through the 700-foot masts. So given that building a new transmitter for Radio 4 would cost millions of pounds for a long wave transmitter, it just isn't going to happen. I understand, and I think it was from my dad, I don't know, but I'm not sure how true it is, that the masts, they're on, it's a section of angle iron or whatever that the masts are made out of, but they taper into virtually to a point at the bottom, and I understand they sit on a glass ball so that they will rock effectively in the wind, just tied in by the guide ropes that keep them upright. But obviously there must be something to isolate them from the ground, and part of the reason I believe for the transmitter being where it is also the fact that all the salt deposits below the ground give a particularly good earth for the transmitters. So we're now passing Stoke Prior. This is the site where the new sources of brine were found that led to the demise of salt production in Droitwich. And so here we are at the shed, ready for a sit down, cup of coffee and a biscuit. Come in, we'll have a look at progress on the pelletwood landy, which I'll bring you up to date with a bit more in a future video, and we'll wait for the rest of the guys and girls for a walk back along the path the other way. I'm not even supposed to be here. You're the leader. So having rested, let's have a ramble back and take a look at today's subject, synchronicity. Synchronicity is a term originally coined by Carl Jung, a psychologist, that refers to deeply meaningful coincidences that mysteriously occur in your life. Now, I don't believe there's any higher spiritual meaning or mysterious force acting here. It's just coincidences as I see them. My take on this is that there shouldn't be really any great surprise when 1,000,000 to 1 events happen, because hundreds, even thousands of events are happening all around us every day. We meet people, see things, do things. Most of them pass without anything of note. So it's hardly surprising that some of them occasionally coincide and seem spooky. But having said that, I still love the circularity and the unusual sort of nature of it all. Let me explain what I'm on about with some real life examples that have given me cause to stop and think, what the hell going on here, you know. At the very simple level, consider Primrose, the Austin 7 that I helped restore with Dad and drove as my first car. You may recall, if you follow the channel, that this time last year I managed to track her down to Scotland and chatted with her current owner, and he was talking about the logbook and mentioned that it had spent most of its years before we got it as a wreck in the small village of Treddington in Warwickshire. Now, as I also mentioned in previous videos, my great-great-great-great-grandfather and several subsequent generations from at least 1735 were born, grew up, worked and are buried in Treddington, and it's more than likely my great-grandfather would have seen it driving around the village. And it's that sort of weirdness that appeals to my nature. On Friday I talked about starting work at Whittall's as a first job, getting married and moving to Droitwich. I also mentioned that we moved after 5 years. In 1978 we went to have a look at new houses being built. We were chatting to the lady in the show home, and she asked what I did, and I said, I'm a surveyor up in Birmingham. And she said, oh, so's my son, I wonder if you know him. Well, this is the sort of thing that I sort of normally dismiss as being nonsense, because Birmingham has loads of building firms, loads of surveyors. You know, what are the chances? I said, what's his name? She said, Keith Jones, to which I replied, well, if it's the Keith Jones that worked at Whittall's until they went bust in 1972, not only did I know him, I worked for him as a trainee surveyor for 3 years, and what's more, my wife used to type his letters. So again, it just struck me as odd. You'll probably have noticed when we set out my Eurocamp rucksack. After several years of bad weather holidays in England, we started driving to Italy to get the sun, and spent many happy hours and years camping in the sun. One year we rocked up at a campsite near Naples after 3 days on the road, and we were stopped chatting to Brits in the next tent who were asking where we were from, and we said Droitwich, just south of Birmingham, to which he replied, oh, you must work for Rodney Smith then. And totally flabbergasted, I said, no, not quite. He's our construction manager and I'm on the surveying side, but how the hell did you know that? And it turns out he worked for SGB, the scaffolding company that was a subsidiary of ours company that I work for, and he'd seen the company sticker on the back window of the car. He was from the Midlands and had worked with our guys on several contracts, so he'd put 2 and 2 together. But the initial statement completely floored me, particularly as we were 2,000 miles away from home. I'll mention in an upcoming update on Bella, the red car, the curious coincidence that I very nearly bought a replica Ferrari before I got her that was once owned by a celeb, only to be invited to his model railway 3 years later. So I took Bella instead, because that was the substitute I had chosen. But this was sadly the day that Bella came home on the recovery truck and didn't move a wheel again until very recently. So perhaps she became jealous, I don't know. I've spoken about the great relationship with my buddy at work yesterday when we started playing around with small works jobs, which at the time was very much a sort of a corporate no-no. They were deemed unprofitable, too small, not within our remit sort of thing, but we just had a bit of a play and found that not only did it make money, it provided an additional service for some of the important clients and got us a lot of repeat business. So after a couple of years of dodging scrutiny from the divisional suits, we got rumbled and folks started to take notice of what we'd built. And sadly, a year or so later, our reward was to have our little empire taken away from us, to be merged with a small works company in the southwestern division that formed a new company called Skillbase, and we went back to building houses and factories and other stuff. Fast forward about 15 years when I went into semi-retirement. I say semi-retirement, it was still a full-time job, insurance claim surveying, but it was much less stress and it was only a 40-hour week, and better still, I worked from home and went back to being an employee. The firm was called Prior, based up in Sheffield, and they were later to be wholly taken over by Aviva, but at the time they were just working as a subcontractor to them. I went up to Sheffield on my induction and was sitting there, and I thought their computer system looked familiar, so I chatted with them a bit about it, and it turned out that Aspria had grown out of Skillbase. So it turned out that I ended my working life working for a company that I'd actually been instrumental in setting up. So what has all this synchronicity to do with Captain Sir Tom? Well, I hate to dare to criticise such a hero, but I really feel he could have put a bit more effort into his military career and got promoted one more rank to Major. That would have worked so much better with the whole of today's exercise. Never mind. I have also mentioned that I moved with my mate over to Leicester to establish a social enterprise building company over there. In addition to the building work, we set up a landscaping company and bought an off-the-shelf company called Wellfin. Now, if you ever get bored, go check it out. It's all the stuff still there in company's house. Look up Wellfin. You'll find we changed the company name to Ground Control Braunston Limited. And amongst the director history, you'll find one Peter Lloyd from Droitwich. So in the circularity that I love so much, you can see it really is sort of ground control to Captain Tom. Enough of all this rambling. We're back at Hanbury Junction, completing the third segment of the journey. Hope you enjoyed the walk, the slightly different videos, the incoherent ramblings of an old man. Join me back at the small shed next Friday when we'll try to be doing something different, if I've survived the walk. I'll see you then. Bye. Yes.